The camp was still, but it was not peaceful. A tension like a coiled serpent wound its way between the tents of Israel, thick and invisible, pressing against the air until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For days now, whispers had slithered through the campfires and cooking pots, whispers of dissatisfaction, of wounded pride, of men who believed they should lead where Moses and Aaron had stood. At the center of this unrest was a man named Korah, a Levite cousin to Moses, a man who knew the sacred duties of the tabernacle, who had seen the cloud of God's presence and yet believed the honor of leadership should not be kept in the hands of just two brothers. Korah was not alone. Beside him were Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben, strong-voiced men, bold in opinion, who carried the scars of long wandering and the frustrations of a promised land still out of reach. With them were 250 well-known leaders, chiefs among the people, men whose names carried weight, whose faces were familiar in every gathering, whose words could bend the mood of a crowd. They came together, not in secret, but in bold defiance. The rebellion had a face, a voice, and a swelling heartbeat. The challenge began with words. They stood before Moses and Aaron, the morning light spilling across their faces, and said with a boldness that sent ripples through the gathered people, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" The accusation cut deep. It was not a question of doctrine. It was a question of authority, of whether God himself had truly chosen Moses and Aaron, or whether these men were simply clinging to power. Moses fell face down, not in defeat, but in the ancient posture of one who knows the weight of divine judgment is about to fall. His voice was calm, yet edged with something far greater than human authority. "In the morning," he said, "the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will have that person come near. You, Korah, and all your followers are to take censers. Put fire and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy." But the air in the camp was already changing. Small groups clustered together in hushed conversation. Some remembered Egypt, its food and its fields, forgetting the chains and the cruel taskmasters. Others thought of the wilderness ahead, uncertain and dangerous. And still others wondered, perhaps in secret agreement with Korah, if Moses' time as leader should end. Dathan and Abiram refused even to come when Moses summoned them. Their words were sharp and contemptuous. "I sin to it enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? And now you also want to lord it over us? You haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you think you can make slaves of us again? No, we will not come." The rejection was like a spear driven into the ground between them, a refusal not only of Moses, but of God's appointed order. That night, the camp did not sleep. Flickers of firelight danced on tent walls. The murmurs carried like restless spirits in the dark. Parents pulled children close, unsure of what the morning would bring. The 250 leaders prepared their censers, polishing them until they gleamed in the firelight. The smell of burning wood and the metallic tang of bronze filled the night air. When dawn came, it came with a heavy stillness. The rebels stood with their censers, faces set, shoulders squared. Moses and Aaron stood apart, the tabernacle behind them, the Ark of the Covenant inside, the very place where the presence of God dwelled. Then, without warning, the glory of the Lord appeared to the whole assembly. A brightness like no earthly light burned in the midst of the camp, and a voice thundered, not in the ears of one man, but in the hearts of all. "Separate yourselves from this assembly, so I can put an end to them at once." The words dropped like stones into the depths of the people's souls. Moses and Aaron fell face down again, their voices urgent and pleading. "O God, the God who gives breath to all living things, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins? But the warning came again, this time sharper. Move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Messengers hurried through the camp, their voices carrying the command. Mothers grabbed children by the hands. Men pulled up tent stakes and backed away. The ground between the faithful and the rebellious grew like a gaping wound in the center of the camp. Korah and his followers stood their ground, unflinching, as if their cause was unshakable. Dathan and Abiram emerged from their tents, their wives and children beside them, eyes defiant. Moses' voice rang out, not in rage, but in solemn declaration. "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and that it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and suffer the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the realm of the dead, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt." And then it happened. The ground beneath their feet trembled, first a shiver, then a violent shaking. A sound like thunder roared from below, not above. The earth split open with a jagged wound, dust, and rocks spraying into the air. The cries of the rebellious filled the camp as the ground beneath them gave way. In an instant, they, their families, their possessions, everything, were swallowed whole. The earth's jaws closed, and the ground returned as if nothing had happened, except for the echo of screams fading into the depths. The people fled in panic, shouting, "The earth is going to swallow us too." But even as they ran, fire blazed forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who had offered incense. The smell of burning flesh and metal filled the air. The camp was gripped in a silence so deep it was almost painful. But this was not the end. The rebellion's embers still smoldered in the hearts of many. Even the next day, the whole Israelite community gathered against Moses and Aaron, their voices accusing, "You have killed the Lord's people." And once more, the glory of the Lord appeared, and judgment moved swiftly across the camp. The smell of smoke lingered like a curse over the camp. Even though the earth had closed again, sealing away Korah and his followers, an unseen heaviness pressed down upon every man, woman, and child. The whispers had ceased. No one dared speak too loudly. In the distance, the blackened remains of the 250 censers still hissed in the cooling ash, their once polished bronze warped and scorched beyond recognition. The air tasted of metal and judgment. But silence in a camp of thousands is never permanent. As the sun rose on the next day, the tension that had been forced into submission began to stir again. At first, it was murmuring at the edges, small gatherings around the cooking fires, voices low but sharp with blame. Some said Moses had gone too far. Others claimed Aaron's priesthood was stained with the blood of their kinsmen. Grief has a way of turning into anger, and anger into accusation. Soon, the rumble of discontent began to swell into something louder, heavier, and far more dangerous. By midday, the people gathered, not in fear this time, but in defiance. The crowd was vast, stretching in a semicircle before the tabernacle, their faces marked with dust and determination. The accusation rose like a single voice. "You have killed the Lord's people." Moses' face was unreadable. Aaron stood beside him, his eyes darting from the crowd to the holy place behind him, as if searching for strength. Then, without warning, the familiar, fearsome radiance of the Lord's glory appeared above the tabernacle. A light, pure and unyielding, pulsed outward, illuminating the rebellious faces. It was a sight that froze hearts in place, the unmistakable sign that God himself had come down to judge. The voice of the Lord thundered again, "Get away from this assembly, so I can put an end to them at once." Moses and Aaron fell face down on the ground, the dust clinging to their skin. Moses' voice was urgent, strained, a desperate plea for mercy. But even as he spoke, a sound began to move through the camp, a sound that was not of earth or sky. It was like the slow hiss of an unseen wind rising into a deadly rush. The plague had begun. It started at the edges of the crowd, men clutching their chests, women staggering and gasping for breath, children crying out in confusion. The illness spread like fire on dry grass, moving from person to person, faster than the eye could follow. In moments, the cries of accusation turned to screams of agony. Faces grew pale, eyes glazed, bodies collapsed to the dust. Moses turned to Aaron, his voice sharp and commanding. "Take your censer and put incense in it, along with fire from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them." Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started. Aaron did not hesitate. He grabbed his censer, filled it with the glowing coals from the altar, and poured in the fragrant incense. The smoke rose immediately, curling into the air with a scent unlike any other, a mixture of sweetness and holiness, the smell of intercession. Holding it before him, Aaron ran straight into the heart of the dying crowd. The people parted around him in terror, watching as he moved with a steadiness that came only from the fear of God. The incense smoke drifted between the living and the dead, marking an invisible barrier. The cries behind him began to fade. The cries before him still burned with urgency. Aaron stood there, censer in hand, between those who had already fallen and those who were yet to be struck, the only thing between them and the full force of God's judgment. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Dust swirled around his feet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the camp. The smell of burning incense mingled with the dry air, carried by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Slowly, the plague stopped. But when it ended, 14,700 people lay still in the dust, not counting those who had died in Korah's rebellion. Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tabernacle. His face was streaked with sweat, his hands trembling slightly from the weight of what he had just seen. Behind them, the camp was a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the judgment had stopped, grief at the vastness of loss. The bodies were carried away, wrapped in rough cloth, the mourning wails carrying far into the night. But the matter of leadership, of priesthood, of God's chosen, was not finished. The Lord spoke to Moses again, this time with instructions that would leave no doubt among the people. Each tribe was to bring a staff, a simple piece of wood, a symbol of its leader, to the tent of meeting. Aaron's name was to be inscribed on the staff of Levi. The staffs were laid before the Lord, placed inside the tabernacle overnight. The next morning, Moses entered the tent. There, in the soft light of dawn filtering through the fabric walls, one staff stood transformed. Aaron's staff, the dry wood that had once been lifeless, was now bursting with life. Buds had formed, blossoms had opened, and ripe almonds hung heavy from its branches. The miracle was not subtle. It was overflowing, undeniable. Moses carried the staff out into the camp. Gasps rose from the people as they saw it, the blossoms still fresh, the almonds still fragrant. No one could deny it. The choice of God had been made plain. The other staffs were returned to their tribes, but Aaron's was kept before the Ark of the Covenant as a sign, a warning, and a reminder for all generations to come. Yet even with this sign, the hearts of the people trembled. They came to Moses, their voices trembling. "We will die. We are lost. Everyone who approaches the tabernacle of the Lord will die. Are we all going to perish?" Fear had replaced rebellion, but it was a fear without peace, a fear that the holiness of God was too great for them to bear. And the journey through the wilderness pressed on. The days ahead would bring new trials, new tests, and new moments where the faith of the people would be stretched to its breaking point. The days that followed were heavy with an uneasy quiet. The camp moved, but it moved slowly, as though each step carried the weight of memory, the shaking ground, the fire from heaven, the plague's invisible touch. Yet the journey could not pause forever. The pillar of cloud still rose each morning above the tabernacle, and when it moved, the people had to follow. The wilderness lay ahead, stretching endlessly, its ridges and valleys shimmering in the heat. Water was always scarce, and the thirst of so many thousands was a constant shadow. It was at Kadesh that the next moment of testing came. The sun beat down without mercy. The skins of water were nearly empty, and the children's cries for drink pierced deeper than any enemy's weapon. Mothers looked to the horizon for streams that never appeared. The elders came to Moses and Aaron, their voices cracking, not only from thirst, but from the strain of distrust that had never truly faded. "Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness?" they demanded. "That we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain, no figs, no grapevines, and no pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Their words stirred an old ache in Moses' heart, the familiar sting of being blamed for every hardship. But this was not a matter of pride. Without water, the people would perish. He and Aaron turned away from the crowd and went to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Once again they fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared. The voice of the Lord spoke clearly. "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink." Moses rose, staff in hand. The people gathered before the rock, their faces taut with expectation. But anger, long pressed down under the weight of leadership, burned in Moses' voice. "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" And with that, instead of speaking to it as commanded, he raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out in a torrent, spilling across the dry ground, filling the people's skins, splashing over the faces of the livestock. The camp erupted in relief, rushing forward to drink. But in the midst of their joy, the Lord's voice came again, this time not with instruction, but with sorrow and finality. "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." The sentence hung heavy over Moses and Aaron. They would lead, but they would not enter. The journey they had endured, the battles they had fought, the years they had carried the people, the end of it would be theirs to see, but not to step into. And so the march through the wilderness continued, each step forward both a fulfillment of duty and a reminder of what had been lost in a single moment of disobedience. From Kadesh, they moved toward Mount Hor, where another change in leadership would come. Aaron, the high priest, the one who had stood with his censer between the living and the dead, was nearing the end of his days. The Lord instructed Moses to bring Aaron and his son Eleazar up the mountain, in full view of the people. The climb was slow, the air thin, the view stretching for miles in every direction. At the summit, Moses removed Aaron's priestly garments and placed them on Eleazar. The robes, the breastpiece, the ephod, each one a symbol of divine service, passed from father to son. And there, on the mountain's peak, Aaron breathed his last. Moses and Eleazar descended in silence, and when the people saw them, they knew Aaron was gone. A great mourning swept the camp, lasting 30 days, the wails of grief echoing against the barren slopes. But grief in the wilderness was a dangerous thing. While Israel mourned, enemies watched. The Canaanite king of Arad heard that Israel was coming by the way of Ephraim, and he struck without warning, capturing some of the people. The camp's sorrow turned to desperation, and they made a vow to the Lord. "If you will indeed deliver this people into our hands, then we will totally destroy their cities." The Lord heard, and the tide turned. The Canaanites were defeated, their cities devoted to destruction, the place named Hormah, utter destruction. Still, the road grew longer. The people became impatient, worn down by the endless curves of the desert path. And once again their voices turned bitter. "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." It was then the judgment came in a new and terrible form: venom. The Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, their scales glinting in the sun, their movements swift and silent until the strike came. The bite burned like fire in the veins, and many died before help could reach them. Panic spread as the snakes moved through the camp like living shadows. The people came to Moses in fear and repentance. "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." Moses prayed, and the answer was unlike any before. The Lord told him, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." Moses crafted a serpent of bronze, lifted high on a pole in the center of the camp. The sunlight caught it, and it gleamed like fire. Those who looked upon it, even with venom burning in their bodies, were healed. It was a lesson burned into their memories, that salvation could be as near as lifting one's eyes in faith. But the desert journey was far from over, and even as the people pressed onward, the horizon held both promise and peril. Rumors of Moabite kings, shadowed altars on distant hills, and unseen enemies waiting to curse them stirred in the wind. The path ahead would test not just their endurance, but their loyalty to the God who had carried them through fire, plague, thirst, and venom. The land began to change as Israel moved closer to the territory of Moab. Rolling plains replaced jagged ridges, and the distant shimmer of the Jordan River hinted that the journey's end was drawing near. But the people were not the only ones watching the river. On the eastern heights, the Moabites had seen the endless column of Israelite tents spread across the desert floor, a sea of people moving like an unstoppable tide. Their hearts melted with fear. Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, had heard the stories. He knew of Egypt's ruin, of the Amalekites crushed, of the Canaanites destroyed at Hormah. His council meetings grew tense, his voice sharp with worry. "This horde will lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field," he said to his advisers. But fear alone would not drive them away. Balak sought something more, a curse. He sent messengers to a man named Balaam, a seer from Pethor on the Euphrates, whose reputation for blessings and curses was known far and wide. "A people has come out of Egypt," Balak's message said. "They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on them for me, because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land." Balaam listened, but the night brought him an unexpected visitor, the voice of God himself. "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on those people, because they are blessed." In the morning, Balaam refused the messengers, but Balak was persistent. More officials came, more promises of reward, more pressure. Balaam wavered, his heart pulled between the word of God and the lure of honor and wealth. Finally, God permitted him to go, but only to speak the words he gave him. So Balaam saddled his donkey and set out. The road ahead seemed clear, until the invisible blocked his way. 3 times the angel of the Lord stood before him, sword drawn, unseen by Balaam, but not by his donkey. The animal veered off the path, crushed Balaam's foot against a wall, and finally lay down beneath him. In frustration, Balaam struck the donkey. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and the animal spoke. "What have I done to you, to make you beat me these 3 times?" Balaam, startled but answering as though this were no stranger thing, argued back. And then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes. He saw the angel of the Lord standing in the path, sword shining with a light that cut through the morning air. The angel's voice was stern. "I have come here to oppose you, because your path is a reckless one before me." Balaam bowed low, the weight of the unseen pressing him to the ground. He continued on, but now with fear, knowing that his tongue would be bound to the words of God alone. When he arrived, Balak took him to high places overlooking the vast encampment of Israel. From the heights, the tribes lay below in ordered ranks, their banners rippling in the wind. Balak's expectation was sharp. Curse them for me. But when Balaam opened his mouth, the words were not curses. They were blessings. How can I curse those whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce those whom the Lord has not denounced? Balak's face tightened. He moved Balaam to another vantage point, hoping a different view might change the outcome. Again, the prophet's mouth spoke blessings, promises of strength, beauty, and victory over their enemies. A third time Balak tried, and a third time the words of God poured forth. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. Like valleys they spread out, like gardens beside a river. Balak's patience snapped. I called you to curse my enemies, but you have blessed them these 3 times. Balaam simply answered, Did I not tell you I must do whatever the Lord says? But while curses failed from the outside, a more subtle danger began to stir from within. The Moabites and their Midianite allies changed tactics. If they could not defeat Israel by force or curse, they would lure them through temptation. The women of Moab approached the camp, their greetings warm, their invitations enticing. Meals were shared, and with the meals came offerings, not to the Lord, but to the gods of Moab. Slowly, the line between Israel and its pagan neighbors blurred. The feasts of Baal of Peor drew more and more of the men. What began as shared food turned into shared worship, and shared worship turned into acts that defiled the covenant itself. The Lord's anger blazed again, and a plague struck the camp. Moses called the leaders to act, commanding that those who had joined themselves to Baal be put to death. The judgment was swift, but in the midst of the assembly, as the people wept, a man of Israel brought a Midianite woman into his tent in open defiance. It was then that Phinehas, grandson of Aaron, rose. In a flash, he took a spear and followed them inside. The spear struck through both, and the plague was stopped, but not before 24,000 had died. The Lord's voice came again, this time not in judgment, but in covenant. Phinehas has turned my anger away from the Israelites. I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God. The camp breathed again, but the air carried the weight of what had been lost. They stood now on the edge of the land they had been promised for generations, yet the wilderness had not released its grip entirely. Each step forward carried the memory of rebellion, of fire, of serpents, of temptation, and the knowledge that more tests would come. Beyond the river, the land waited, fertile valleys, walled cities, enemies who feared them but would not yield without a fight. The Jordan's waters glimmered in the distance, but between Israel and their inheritance stood the command of the Lord, the call to obedience, and the certainty that holiness was not optional if they were to take hold of the promise. The promise of the land shimmered on the horizon like a mirage close enough to taste, yet held beyond reach by the swelling currents of the Jordan River. The Israelites stood poised at this threshold, their hearts heavy with the weight of all they had endured. Each person bore scars, some visible, many hidden deep within, scars of wandering, testing, rebellion, and redemption. The voices of ancestors echoed in their memories, reminding them of the covenant made at Sinai, the miraculous provision of manna, and the fiery pillar that had led them through night and storm. Yet the river before them was no ordinary obstacle. The Jordan, swollen from the spring rains, surged with a power that spoke of nature's might and divine purpose alike. The people's faith trembled as they beheld it, for to cross meant stepping into the unknown, a final passage from wilderness to promise. Moses, standing before the assembled tribes, lifted his voice with unwavering resolve. Prepare yourselves, for the Lord your God will perform wonders among you. His words rippled through the crowd, stirring hope and trepidation in equal measure. At the command, the priests took up the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, and stepped forward toward the water's edge. The moment the soles of their feet touched the river, an astonishing thing occurred. The rushing waters piled up in a wall on either side, and a dry path appeared through the midst of the flood. The people gasped as they witnessed the waters held back by divine hand, a path carved through chaos itself. One by one, the tribes passed through, their footsteps stirring up the dust of ages and the promise of a new beginning. Behind them, the waters surged back with a thunderous roar, swallowing the path as if to seal the miracle away from doubters. The crossing was complete, but the challenges awaiting them had only just begun. Across the Jordan lay fortified cities, giant strongholds that loomed like shadows over the fertile plains. Jericho, the greatest among them, stood as a sentinel guarding the land. Its towering walls had withstood countless sieges, and its defenders jeered at the Israelites' approach. Yet the Lord's instructions to Joshua, Moses' successor, were clear and mysterious. The people were to march around Jericho once each day for 6 days, with priests blowing trumpets made from ram's horns, and on the seventh day to circle the city 7 times, with a great shout to bring the walls tumbling down. The first days passed in quiet obedience, the people's steps echoing on the ground, the sound of trumpets piercing the still air. Doubt flickered in some hearts. How could mere footsteps and noise bring down stone walls? But faith held them firm. On the 7th day, as the sun began to rise, the procession began anew. Each circuit drew them closer to destiny, and as the final trumpet sounded and the people shouted as one, the walls shook violently. Cracks spiderwebbed through the stones, and with a mighty crash, Jericho's defenses crumbled, leaving the city ripe for conquest. The victory was not just of sword and strategy, but of obedience and trust in the Lord's power. Yet the land's spoils brought a new test of greed and loyalty. One man, Achan, took for himself some of the devoted things from Jericho's destruction, violating God's clear command. His secret sin brought a plague upon the camp, and only after it was discovered was the judgment executed. Achan and his family were taken away, and the people wept at the cost of disobedience. The journey pressed on, and with each new conquest, the tribes learned that the promise was intertwined with holiness. The land could only be theirs by God's mercy and their faithfulness. As Joshua sent spies to scout the city of Ai, the people prepared to face new enemies, unaware that the greatest battle would not always be against swords or walls, but against the temptation to stray from the covenant. Amid these trials, stories of faith and courage blossomed: the woman Rahab who hid the spies, the steadfast warriors who trusted in God's strength, and the leaders who carried the burdens of a nation poised to take root in a land flowing with milk and honey. Yet the wilderness journey was never truly behind them. In the quiet moments between battles, the memories of Korah's rebellion, the fiery serpents, and the plagues lingered like shadows at the edge of their vision, reminders that God's holiness demanded reverence and obedience. And so the people stood at the cusp of a new chapter, their eyes fixed on the land ahead, their hearts wrestling with the weight of the past and the hope of the future. The story was far from over. The path ahead would be filled with more challenges, victories, and divine encounters that would shape the destiny of a people chosen to be a light to the nations. The winds whispered across the plains as the tribes settled into their new territories, yet the air was thick with uncertainty. The land of promise, so long dreamed of and fought for, was not simply an inheritance to be claimed by right of birth. It was a battlefield of faith and obedience, where every step forward was a test of trust in the God who had led them through wilderness and war. Joshua, now the steadfast leader, bore the weight of this new chapter with the solemnity of a man who knew the fragile line between victory and defeat. His eyes scanned the horizon beyond the broken walls of Jericho and Ai, watching for the next challenge that awaited the people. But it was not just external foes that threatened Israel. It was the internal struggle, the shadow of rebellion and forgetfulness that had marked their journey from the start. As the tribes took root in the land, the ancient covenant demands echoed louder than ever. The altars needed rebuilding, the tabernacle reestablished in a new place, and the priests and Levites called to their sacred duties with renewed fervor. The songs of worship began again, lifting up praises that mingled with the rustle of olive trees and the rush of rivers flowing through the valleys. Yet beneath this veneer of peace, tension simmered. The people wrestled with the lingering memory of Korah's defiance, a reminder etched into their history that no one was above the holiness of the Lord. The lessons of the past plague, fire, earth swallowing, were warnings they could not ignore. Elders told stories by firelight, cautionary tales woven into the fabric of their identity, urging each generation to hold fast to the path of righteousness. And then came the days when new voices rose, voices questioning the leadership of Joshua, voices tempted by the allure of the surrounding nation's gods, voices that sought to draw Israel back into old patterns of sin. These whispers, though quieter than Korah's roar, were no less dangerous. The spiritual battleground stretched beyond the physical cities and hills. It delved deep into the hearts of the people. Prophets arose, voices carrying the thunder of the Lord's justice and mercy. They spoke not only of punishment, but of restoration, calling the people back to faithfulness. Their messages often met resistance, yet seeds were planted, seeds of hope that would one day blossom in the promises yet to come. Meanwhile, the land itself bore witness to these struggles. Fertile fields gave way to rocky hills, peaceful vineyards sometimes marred by signs of conflict. The seasons marked the passing years, reminding Israel that their journey was not only one of conquest, but of transformation, from a wandering people to a nation shaped by divine purpose. Families told their children of the manna from heaven, the water from the rock, the bronze serpent lifted high, and the earth's trembling at Korah's rebellion stories meant to kindle faith and warn against pride, each retelling a thread in the tapestry of a people learning to live under God's covenant. As the generations passed, the tension between God's justice and his mercy played out in the daily lives of the Israelites. Leaders rose and fell, battles were fought and won, alliances formed and broken. Through it all, the presence of God remained, unseen yet palpable, guiding, correcting, comforting. But the journey toward fullness was far from complete. The echoes of the wilderness still resonated in their souls, a reminder that holiness is a path walked daily, that the promise of the land carries with it the demand for faith, obedience, and humility. And so the story moved onward through the rise of judges, the calling of kings, the building of temples, and the unfolding saga of a people chosen to reveal the heart of the divine to a watching world. From the very moment the earth split open and swallowed the rebellious men alive, to the fiery judgment that followed, and the miraculous signs that declared God's chosen leaders, the story of Israel as wilderness journey is a breathtaking testament to the holiness of God and the grave consequences of rebellion. Korah's uprising was not merely a power struggle, it was a direct challenge to the divine order, and the earth itself responded with a thunderous no. The swift and terrifying judgment reminded the people that God as presence demands reverence and obedience above all else. Yet even as judgment fell, God's mercy was evident. When plague ravaged the camp, the intercession of Aaron with his incense was a profound picture of the bridge between a holy God and sinful humanity. The miraculous budding of Aaron's staff affirmed God's sovereign choice, reminding the people that leadership and blessing come from divine appointment, not human ambition. The trials continued, the thirst and the water from the rock, the deadly serpents and the bronze serpent lifted on a pole each episode, a vivid lesson on faith, obedience, and God's sustaining grace. Even when Balaam, a foreign seer, was sent to curse them, God's blessing broke forth instead, revealing that his promises are unshakable and his purposes unstoppable. The seductive snares of Baal worship and the resulting plague showed the constant spiritual dangers Israel faced, even within their own camp. But through it all, God's covenant of peace extended, exemplified by Phinehas's zealousness and the renewal of priestly promises, pointing forward to a deeper holiness and zeal that would one day find fulfillment. Finally, the crossing of the Jordan River and the fall of Jericho were not just military victories. They were divine acts confirming that the land was truly given by God to his people. But the story warns that possession of promise requires faithful living. Achan's sin and its deadly consequences illustrated that disobedience risks the entire community, while the continued battles and spiritual warfare ahead made clear that the path to inheritance is neither easy nor guaranteed. Through every mountain climbed, every serpent faced, and every battle fought, one truth stands out. God's holiness is both awe-inspiring and exacting, his judgment swift and just, his mercy abundant and redemptive. Israel's journey from the wilderness to the promised land is a mirror for every generation, calling us to recognize the dangers of pride and rebellion, to trust in God's provision, and to walk humbly under his covenant. This epic tale is not just history, it is a living call to faithfulness, a warning and a hope, a reminder that the God who splits the earth to judge sin is also the God who lifts up his people to walk in blessing. And yet, the story does not end here. The journey continues, the covenant deepens, and the promise beckons ever onward. There are new battles to face, new voices to hear, and a greater salvation yet to unfold, a salvation that will not only redeem a nation, but the entire world.